I'm Mike Cruz, manager of Greenpoint Fish Wholesale, and I'm here to show you how to fillet every fish. To fillet fish, I usually have around 3 knives with me, depending on the size of the fish. One of these butcher knives is really good for cutting through heads. This 7-inch curved fillet knife, and a little 5-inch guy. You also need a pair of scissors, a steel to keep your knife sharp, a scaler, and a good pair of tweezers to get those pin bones out. Sardine. I think people kind of think of sardines as something Grandpa has in a tin tucked away and hasn't touched in like 10 years. Sardines require no tools to prepare. Any scales that you see on here are totally edible and are always served whole if they're fresh. So to prepare a sardine, you're gonna open up that gill plate, grab it from the gills and pinch them out. Once the gills are free, you'll grab it from the collar here, and without much pressure, it tears right off. So now, holding onto the collar and the gills, and using your finger to sort of open up the belly, you'll take out all the guts. As soon as you do that, the rib bones start separating on their own, and touching one side of the spine, you can use your fingers sort of like a knife and just run it straight down. And do the same exact thing to the other side. Make sure you're completely free. Then pick the spine up from the center. You'll sort of slip the tail through, pull these up, and take them out. And then you will have a butterfly sardine. Porgy. Porgy is a classic East Coast fish. I always look at porgies as the pigeons of the sea, which is not a bad thing. I say that usually because they have some crazy colors in them when they first come out of the water. Lots of like purples and greens and blues. It's a classic like fish fry spot fish for sure. So to start, we'll grab our scaler, get that fin out of the way, start peeling scales back, making sure you're going diagonal against the grain of the scales from the tail towards the head, making sure you're getting everything out of the way that's gonna get in the way of your knife. If you have difficulty scaling these fish, just play around with the position of the scaler. I mean, it just kind of depends on the fish and how much trouble the scales are giving you. Skeletal structure is gonna be pretty basic. You pull this up, get right down underneath that collar, and come out. So you make your first cut at the head. Now, porgies can be skinny sometimes, so especially important to make sure that you are staying tight to the bones. Crack through the pin bones on the ribs, pushing down on them, and peeling the fillet back. Now, one thing I think people don't give porgy enough credit for is its fat content, and you'll feel it as you cut this, how oily the fish is. That's porgy fillet. Boston mackerel. This fish is highly oily, definitely has a strong fish flavor, which is great because it is a fish. Super good for you, super high in omega fatty acids, really good for like brain development and things like that. This fish is awesome and my personal favorite. So Boston mackerel is a great fish to eat whole, whether you just pull the guts out and throw it in your oven or butterflying it, and that's what I'm gonna show you today. So with this guy, open up the gill plates and just snip that very tip there. Work around sort of the membrane and open it up, being really careful not to puncture too many organs, and you'll open this guy up. Get your scissor into the tip of the gills, gently pinch and twist and pull up and out. And get a paper towel to clean off the insides. This blood is fairly strong flavored, so you don't want to have too much of it touching the actual fillets. So we'll start from the tail. Just stay on top of these small fins here. Make your first cut really shallow, making sure you're on top of the bones, opening up that belly cavity, just gently cracking through the rib cage, and following through to the other side, cracking the remaining pin bones. Once you have that side free, flip the fish over, starting from the head, and just using the very tip, just start cracking through those bones, and being careful not to cut all the way down through the skin. And then with your scissors, you'll cut right in the middle of the tail to get into the bones. And once you're here, you can just pull out and crack. Face the head away from you and just get right up against those ribs and just gently wiggle your knife underneath them. Same thing on this side, and just follow them, kind of pulling them away from the flesh as you do it. And with these guys, because their bones are so small and brittle, it's totally fine to leave the pin bones in and eat it as is. Bronzino. Bronzino is a farmed European sea bass, commonly eaten whole. Sometimes you see fillets. This, I think, is probably one of the best introductory fish. Super low maintenance. You can cook this any sort of way and it's probably gonna be delicious. Like with everything else, the scales need to come off. Another great way, actually, to scale a fish, if you're doing this in your house and you don't want to get scales everywhere, is to fill your sink with water and scale the fish underwater. And Bronzino is a pretty buttery fish to fillet in that the meat kind of just wants to come off the bone. So when you're coming through the collar here, you really want to be gentle to only use the very tip of your knife. You don't want to put pressure and start puncturing any organs that might damage the flesh. So what you'll do is start your first cut towards the head and just very gently go down and just open up the spine. Except for where you have to come up to the ribs, you're going to want to put a little bit of pressure and just crack through them. And then go over very gently, being careful not to touch any organs and using small but smooth cuts and freeing up your fillet. And going on the second side, free up the collar. And when I go to my second position on a fish, I like to use the length of my blade to make that first cut. Just because the tail's a little skinnier, kind of wobbles a little bit while you're cutting it. And I'm pushing down on the ribs to flex them out of my way. Once those are free, you can pretty much put your knife in and just follow straight down. And you'll trim up that belly membrane. You'll have a nice filleted Bronzino. Striped bass.